with scissors kind of violation of things, but that we actually err on the side of, and that is really what's recommended, that you err on the side of being more transparent, being more open, being more cooperative, not to the point where it's illegal or reckless. So that would be the motion that I would make, and I thank you for the second in support of openness.
I have a question. We already have some kind of a policy. Is that correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Would it be possible? I mean, you're asking. What you're asking seems benign and no problem. Why not add a sentence that says we want it to be open and you have to, but they still have to be looked over and decided if it's appropriate. I mean, you know, it's not. Somebody's going to have to make a decision at some point if it's appropriate or not, and it's not going to be a policy because each individual, you know, item is going to have to be considered on its own merits. So we could add a sentence or two to say that it's important to us.
I would not even go that far. What I'm suggesting is we review the policy. Now, a wise board.
Do you think we don't have a policy that right now?
Board and
well, you read it. I have.
A wise board and a wise general counsel would periodically review its policies,
well,
and that should be a routine that we go through. And I think this is the moment where we need to review that policy.
Did you read this and you found it was lacking?
It's very generic. If you've ever read the Access to District Records, it's quite generic, and it's CSBA. It doesn't mean that we can't go beyond that. A board and a general counsel really ought to work together to go through regular review of board policy. And it should be kind of a rotating cycle. We don't ever do that. And I'm suggesting we do that. So rather than spend a lot of time on this, I would just hope that the board would support this idea that we are actually just asking staff to review this. And then I have a second motion that I would like to, that I hope addresses what Mrs. Mayo was concerned about. And it's, again, not a decision tonight. It's an information item, but it's, I think, the next step that will help us bring this forward to closure. So I would ask if there's no comment on this policy review.
Mr. Rolen, within the policy that we currently have, is there anything that could have been done differently so that this request wouldn't have come to the board and there could have been a different way of providing the documents requested?
Absolutely not. There is, if somebody's inclined to bring a request directly to the board, they're allowed to do that. There's nothing. The only thing that I can imagine that would have precluded the letter was that we gave over a number of documents that were privileged documents. So to answer your question directly, there's absolutely nothing that could have been done to stop this from being brought directly to the board. Let me take that response one step further again. Every request for records in any sort of legal context is essentially brought to the board. Any request in a teacher dismissal case, any request in a due process hearing, investigation, EEOC response, is a request of the Board of Education, not to mention the voluminous requests we get in all our civil litigation. So these requests and these privileges are held by the board. So that is why you have counsel and that is why you have staff to respond to these things. Because if all that is required is a simple request to bring matters before the board and to engage in a discussion at the board level regarding each and every document and each and every privilege related thereto, that could bring this organization to a halt. It really could. So what I was saying that this really isn't that different is that all requests are essentially requests to the board.
Okay, comment?
What I'd like to see, so I remember in the mid-90s when it was brought to the federal level with the Freedom of Information Act, that President Clinton made changes to the law because the default had been we're going to assume all items, all documents are privileged unless proven otherwise, and changed the default of that to that items are belonging to the public unless there's a compelling reason not to share them, so that what John Lennon had for breakfast in 1963 was no longer deemed as classified information. And that, for me, is what's instructive about Ms. Hansen's motion, that I'd like to see us, by default, have all documents be open, and I appreciate the General Counsel's role in making sure that we don't give up documents that are vital, but as we balance those two things, for me, the original intent is to share whenever possible the documents, and then if there's a compelling reason, decide not to share them. But coming from that standpoint, rather than everything's privileged and we're going to have to prove that there's a reason to release them.
May I address that, Mr. Lawrence? The way the Public Records Act request is currently formulated is just as you say. The burden is on the agency to demonstrate that our withholding is justified, not on the public. We are not making a decision that everything is privileged unless they prove otherwise. That's not how it's happening. So, and that is why, and you're right, there is a tenuous balancing act sometimes. And that's why we have courts. Sometimes requesters are wrong, sometimes agencies are wrong. Sometimes we can't agree. And that's why there's courts, and that's why the structure of the act strongly favors disclosure and strongly favors the requester when making that decision. We simply haven't had those challenges.
And since I guess I'm still, and I realize you don't have exact numbers, but I'm just trying to get a sense of roughly how many documents we were talking in this matter. Are we talking tens? Are we talking hundreds? Are we talking thousands? And of that, roughly what percentage were deemed to be privileged? Can you just give me a ballpark?
No, that's a discussion for closed session.
Well, and again, I disagree, but we're going to obviously disagree. This is not a court of law here. We don't want to go into a court of law where, by the way, if there's a time when we have to go into the court and present each piece of each document or each record and have a judge say confidential or not, we really don't want to go there. So I would ask that...
I have just a comment I'd like.
Yes.
The one thing that I think that I see as sitting here, a person who is supposed to watch money and is supposed to be concerned about every single penny that we spend, it sounds, I don't want to keep anything from the public that needs to be seen, and I don't want to, but it just seems to me you're sort of suggesting this such open policy that anybody can walk in and ask for anything, and our work stops while we run around and get it for them. And I mean, that does stop what goes on around here, and our prime responsibility is our students and not these things. I mean, these things are important, but they have these time frames that, you know, box us in and don't allow us to do it in a way that works well for us. It can cost us a lot of money in staff time as we run around and do it. And if there's anybody out there who just particularly thinks it's fun to do this, then we're really at their mercy when they ask and we have to produce. So there's nothing, first of all, I'm absolutely certain there's nothing in this whole process to hide. And it's sort of a mystery to me what that one little possible thing could be that we are hiding and that I don't even know about. But anyway, I think that we have to look at the big picture, and the big picture is we just can't have everyone wandering in asking for things that we have to stop.
Well, Mrs. Demler, no one's asking for that. There's a legal guideline and a process that goes through that's bigger than all of us. What so we're suggesting here is, first of all, the problem is,
excuse me,
as an employee in a public agency, that is part of the job and the responsibility. If you work in a private agency, you can say, forget it, we're not providing you with that information. But employees who work in a public agency, people who are public officials, bring with them that responsibility to provide that information.
They do, and
you have to work within those timelines, legal timelines.
The newspaper also has what they're thinking. They need a story. They need something to run with. And if by asking for lots of documents from us, it can create an interesting article, there's no reason.
Again, we're here tonight to look at our response to a Public Records Act request and whether or not we felt it was responsive, or there was reluctance, or there are documents that we need to look at separately in closed session. But
well, then
it's not about you know, the Times and their responsibility, it's
Well,
about
they're
our
the-
responsibility.
No, the Times
So
can
I'm
be
gonna-
very
I'm
irresponsible.
gonna
No,
Stop,
no,
excuse me, Mrs.